Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming out on this cold night. My name's Lara Wood-Gladwin. I go to the 4:30 service here, and it's lovely to see you all. Welcome to those online tonight as well. Thank you for making the effort at home to log on and to follow along with us. There's a few things I need to cover tonight just in introductions. I'll try not to forget anything. Got some notes here. I do recognise the irony of having my notepad and highlighted notes here at this AI seminar, but anyway, that's how I roll. I would like to start by acknowledging that we are meeting tonight on Ngunnawal land and beautiful Ngunnawal country, and acknowledge the continuing connection to country our First Nations people have, and also to recognise other families that have strong connections to this land. I'd like to extend that respect to First Nations people that might be attending tonight or watching online, and perhaps even watching online from a different beautiful country joining us tonight. Especially poignant to this week being National Reconciliation Week, and the first Reconciliation Week after the referendum last year. So I hope you've been having the time over the long weekend and this week to participate in some of the really fantastic activities that have been available in Canberra and also online. I'd like to welcome our panel. We've got Michael Gately in the middle here. He's the CEO and founder of Trellis Data, an AI specialist company in Australia and globally. Nick Davis, who's an industry professor of emerging technology and co-lead at the Human Technology Institute at the University of Tech in Sydney. And Ryan Young, the director of the NSC Future Hub at the ANU and a consultant philosopher with Queritas. It's a really diverse and exciting panel. They've got really different takes on some of the issues we're going to discuss tonight, and it's been really fun doing the preparation with them. In terms of format, it is sort of a panel format, question style, but I would describe it a little bit more as a fireside chat, because it's better when they just riff off each other rather than directing one question at a time to one panel member. So it'll be a little free-flowing, and I think that'll be really interesting. AI is such a huge topic, and there's so many things to discuss. And I should just start by saying the views of the panel are not necessarily the views of the ministers here at this church, or the Anglican church, or even the views of you. We, as Christians, we have a lot in common, but of course we have divergent views, and that's half the fun. So I hope you will embrace that and ask some tough questions, put them on the spot. To do that, we've got a Slido up on the screen. But you can also just raise your hand at the end, and we've got a mic that will come around. But if you're online, please use the Slido as well. I will start, because it is such a huge topic, I will start with just a couple of sort of parameters or definitions, just so that we're sort of loosely on the same page. Some of the definitions, there's so many different definitions, but one that we sort of agreed on is starting with what is the definition of intelligence, which is the ability to undertake a complex task. So artificial intelligence is the ability for a machine to undertake a complex task. And also tonight, we really want to focus on the faith questions around AI. There are podcasts and panels and books and seminars on so many topics to do with AI. So many issues for us as parents or as public policy makers, as lawyers or practitioners or users of AI. But tonight it's that intersection with our Christian faith. Also, we'll say we're going to start by just going straight into some of the issues and questions, which does assume a little bit of knowledge or thought from the audience. So just a couple of three key things that stood out to me in doing the research, which is like a few weeks' research, not years of research. So these are definitely the things that the literature really jumped out at me. Starting with God as this amazing, huge, creative, intelligent being who created us in his image. So we are creative and intelligent, and we create, and all throughout history have created new tools to improve our situation. But there's also the fall and there's sin in that, and sin in our creations. The Bible has so much wisdom in it and tools for us to navigate those spaces. And the other key principle in most of the literature is that central tenet of our relationship with God and our relationship with each other as being central to our humanity. So those are the things that I really picked up on, and they will touch on some of that, and they'll touch on all sorts of other things. But if you haven't read or thought about this a lot, they're just a couple of key helpful pointers that this kind of helps us to frame our theology around this topic. And the last thing before we get to the panel is we have at the end, I've put a poll on the Slido, and I just want to tell you the question. You can think about it now, but I'll hold off doing your vote towards the end till you've heard some of the thoughts, and have a think if your instinctive reaction to this question is different when you get to the end, a different answer to what you'd give. Do you think it's okay for Guy or any of our ministers to use AI to write a sermon? Does that sit okay with you? So let it sit with you now, your instinctive reaction. Listen to the panel, and we'll come back at the end and have a little vote on the Slido. There's a poll for whether you think that's okay, and I'll give the feedback to the ministers so they know where the church is at on that question, just in case they're already using it. I don't know, we'll see. I think, is that all the admin? Am I good? Okay. So, first question, just to warm us up. If each of you, short, can tell us a little bit briefly about how you connect with AI in your lives and why, and maybe a little bit about how that connects with your faith. Do you want to start that end, Ryan?
Okay. So AI in connection to my life. So as Lara mentioned, I work in an outfit called the Future Hub at ANU, but also my background, training and interests are a philosopher. So really, I'm not someone who really focuses on AI as a day-to-day tool or builds it or something, but I'm really interested in focusing on what AI means for us as societies, public policy, as humans, what it means, how it's going to change us, change the future, change our societies, and trying a lot of my work thinking around that is where is it going, how's it going to impact, and what does that mean for us as societies, jobs, people, what does that mean we'll be like in the future, but also what does it tell us about ourselves at the moment. So really interested in that, what AI is, what it isn't, what intelligence is, what does that mean about us as humans, and I'll stop before I keep talking.
So I run a company that builds AI products and sells them around the world. We build things in computer vision, so what cameras can see, in speech, so how people talk, and also in generative AI, so creating content. So that's an interesting thing to run a company like that and be a Christian in that context as well. We often call ourselves the good people, but I'll be happy to answer your questions that might challenge that. But I think AI has a lot of great opportunity in what it can do, and we focus on delivering those things to help firstly Australians and then secondly other countries.
And I guess I sit between Michael and Ryan in many ways. So I co-lead a research institute which publishes no academic papers and teaches no students, which is the perfect position for an academic. Unfortunately, it is at UTS, so a little bit far from here day to day. But our work at the Human Technology Institute is really around the governance of artificial intelligence, and we look at it through three lenses. First, the public policy aspect of this, so working with government, state and federal, around things like digital ID, around facial recognition bill, the national safety standard and the new mandatory guidelines for high-risk AI that Minister Husick will be announcing any day now, apparently. And then we work with organisations to embed those as policies and make them real. And we're also really lucky to have a team of 10 data scientists that just work on some really cool cutting-edge stuff in that space. But all of that comes back to kind of a set of values and perspectives that, connect to me personally as a Christian, but also the team more broadly as people who are very much human rights based. And so we try and blend law, policy, social science research and the data science to craft both the rules and the practice in the right direction, and supporting both of these types of organisations, the ones that create and do great work, and those that are helping us reflect more broadly in society.
Excellent. So the first question, there's a lot of familiar rhetoric, particularly when you think about the Americans and guns, around guns aren't evil, it's the people who use them that are either good or evil. So what do we think about that with AI? Is it good? Is it evil? Is it neutral? Where does it sit on that spectrum? Nick, do you want to?
I think this is one of the questions that I get asked the most in this space. I'm sure you guys do too. But is AI good or is it evil? And then sometimes people will say, like you just did, or neutral. And my answer normally is, first, that's a terrible question, right? But that's a really bad way to get out of a question, right? Like, it's not true. It is a useful question to consider. But the answer is that it's neither good, nor bad, nor neutral. Those labels don't really apply to a tool that has a huge range of capabilities, but also embodies the values of the people that create it. And in the same way that when you, if you were to go into a negotiating situation to people sitting across the table trying to negotiate a house deal or something, or a car purchase, and someone just casually pulls a gun out and puts it on the table between the two of you, it completely will change that whole system with you, not because the gun is good or bad, but because it's definitely not neutral in that context. And I think that when we think about this as Christians and where we use AI in our lives, it's definitely not neutral. It has some weight on us in the circumstances that we use it, but it's not forcing us in one direction or the other. It's just gravitationally influencing us because of the decisions that other people have made. And we have to be really aware of that, particularly if we care about the things you mentioned: fellowship, our relationship with God, how church administration runs.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting when you think about that, like it's the actual analogy is a gun. So inherently in our minds we're thinking about something that is useful for shooting, which is not often attributed to health outcomes or improving education. So I think that I completely agree with what Nick is saying, but I think that AI is so big that it becomes a problem. So if you think about it in the sense that it is not neutral, I agree completely with that, but it may help find cancers at a higher rate with experts assisting in that process. So we think about it as saving lives as well. And so it's definitely not neutral, but if you think of it as medicine on the table, it will conjure up a different view of the sort of framing the problem, if you like, of what it is you're looking at.
I'll jump in just to thought in terms of it being not neutral. I think the other aspect to it, and medicine's probably a good analogy in that, again, medicine itself can be good, can be evil, depending on where you use it, but it's also what you understand it's there for, what you apply the medicine for, and how it actually plays out in practice. And I think that's one of the other aspects with AI that's really important. We have lots of myths and ideas about what AI can do, how it works, what it can achieve. And that distorts our decision making, distorts how we use it in ways that actually maybe it isn't up to scratch or it can't do that. So, looking for cancers, is AI better than humans? Yes, in some cases maybe, but the myth that people are trying to sell us this stuff as something that's better and can replace humans, and that in itself is again not neutral, and that kind of adds a whole nother layer on top of it, the gap between myth and reality.
Yeah, but that journey itself is a journey of discovery on what is right for us as humans. So the result is, the data's in that it's best to not have a machine do it without expert involvement as part of the process. But having an expert provides an optimal result for health outcomes. So it's about understanding you don't just turn on the button and walk away. I think that's the issue and the risk of AI. The promise of it taking everyone's jobs is a terrible promise. And we shouldn't be thinking about it in that way. We should be thinking about how it helps us do a better job of what we're already doing. And I don't know about you guys, but, I work long hours, as I'm sure a lot of us do here, and so it would be great for something to help us in that space, but not take the job. because we're experts in our jobs.
So what about standards then? That's what you're looking at. Where do standards fit, and what, again, moving slightly away from being a Christian, but as a Christian, how should we think about what sort of standards you should impose and which ones you should just let business, the market, sort itself out?
Yeah, so I think just to directly answer that question, but also to reinforce something that Michael just said that's really important for this kind of debate, is that the phrase, and I'm paraphrasing you there, but artificial intelligence is lots of things. In fact, it's a terrible phrase because it's, Kate Crawford, who wrote one of the best books that I think on AI called The Atlas of AI, she says it's neither artificial nor intelligent. It's not intelligent to the point that you made. It's not akin to any type of real human intelligence. It's got quite a lot of machine processing power, problem-solving, pattern matching, but none of the social intelligence that we need and that is part of, the God-given kind of image that we work on and work with as Christians. But it's not artificial either. It's a whole bunch of people and real objects in real space that come from natural resources that are crunching and working to, direct us to where the nearest coffee is. So that's to say, there's so many things that we do have to kind of, when it comes down to standards or any other aspect, it's best to come down to a particular use case and say, what are we really worried about? And I guess the things that I keep on coming back to is that I worry about use cases where the context is vulnerable people. I'm worried about use cases where a human-to-human connection is an integral part of the value, and I don't want that to be automated or replaced away. And I come back to the challenge that we have as a society where a business model for someone trying to recoup their investment might drive some pretty terrible practices down the line. And the one that I worry about right now in terms of use cases is how effective AI is not just at working with doctors to diagnose cancers, which it's best with doctors, right? It's not best on its own, not best doctors on their own, but together. But it's actually now better than most humans at convincing people to do things. So, and that's a particular type of generative AI, a particularly advanced set of generative AI models, but they are better at humans in text and texted conversation to manipulate you, basically. It can manipulate people. And because it's a computer program, it can do so at scale. And that scares me deeply. It worries me because I know that we're going into a new world where every interaction that we have through a device, could be being manipulated in some way. And standards are there to say the ACCC manages consumer law in Australia. It oversees consumer rights. We have a right not to be misled, not to have unfair contracts imposed on us by businesses. How do we make sure that businesses then don't take advantage of us and our, congregation and our friends in the community by trying to make all the money back they've invested on AI by automating unfair business practices? And right now, the ACCC, I can tell you, it's open, they haven't really looked at this stuff very much. They haven't had the resources or the time. So that concerns me. And I think that's something that we should all be thinking about in that bigger social picture of AI, a bit further away, as you say, from our personal relationship with it.
Yeah, I know we're going a bit off the question a little bit, but I think that's a really good point. So you guys seen the ads for Google Phone where you can take the photo of the whatever it is, and then it'll come up in the shop and you can buy it. It's awesome, right? How do you know that's the best item for you given your location of where you are? And that the local business in Curtin shops, which would be much better at supporting you in that, doesn't get a look in because they're not paying extra money to Google for that result. So I think that the ACCC, they've got a long way to go on this one to figure this out, but it is absolutely, one of the things I know is, and it's a little bit of a tip, is try putting other things in the search, like only available in Curtin, and it will bring up things nearby. But that requires you to think every time. It requires that proactive engagement, not to be fed and just take the food, but actually go, hang on a second, I need to question that. And I think this is a good part in terms of faith, is that we should question our faith too and learn and develop that carefully. And I think that when we get fed things from online, we should recognise that those companies are worth more than the Australian economy a number of times over. They're not thinking about ourselves in that, they're thinking about their business model, to Nick's point, and as long as billions of people are using it, they will continue to do those practices. And there's nothing illegal about them from their perspective. So I think the standards are, bring it back now, I think the standards are effectively non-existent, I would suggest, and should be put in play, in the first instance, should be put in play in the social media space. Absolutely.
I like that, because that's a standard I can put in. I can type in things available in Curtin. I can impose that no matter what the government's doing or the agency's
I think we have to
doing.
remember that we are human.
That we have some autonomy in this.
We have intelligence.
Yeah.
And we should apply that and not take the food that's fed to us. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the issue of standards is an important one, but it's also a tricky one in the sense of how do we impose standards on big multinational companies or a whole lot of kind of other dynamics. And I think that personal standards issue, I think, comes back to what I see as one of the big challenges with AI, in that whether it's text-to-speech convincing people, whether it's the quality of pictures of people nowadays, which are more convincing, the AI ones, than real people, whether it's the quality of I guess the information that you get fed into, whether it's the quality of writing. So we have a whole lot of things that we use ourselves to judge the quality. Do we trust something online? Do we trust an interaction with someone? And we have a whole lot of things in mind that we've used historically. Good quality grammar, well-written, professionally constructed websites, all these kind of dynamics. It goes to, do you trust an online retailer? There's a whole lot of cues that you look for that tell you whether it's trustworthy or not. All of these can get easily faked with AI by someone, so that we cannot tell, we cannot rely on the things that we instinctively have trusted, even to the extent of a conversation with someone online. There are cues that we thought would mean that someone's human. Now it may well be more AI and they're more convincing to us. So it goes to that extent of, how do we, I guess, make those decisions? What judgments? How much do we trust what's coming online? I think we all know that we shouldn't trust stuff online anyway, but I think now often the stuff that's most trustworthy may actually be least trustworthy, and it's a real thing that I don't think we're only starting to get our heads around.
And there's a really interesting link here back to theology and Christian faith in terms of by grace alone, by scripture alone, by linking, the kind of classic Lutheran creed of thinking sola scriptura. We as Christians and as Anglicans and evangelical Christians really look to, God's word. We are entering a world now where you can trust less and less the written material around you, because the quality of the terrible stuff is getting better, right? It's able to mask itself. And it's able to replicate itself as well. So in that sense, it reminds us that we have to just keep going back to the source that we trust, and we have to keep going back to that grounding. And I've been reminded on this recently because there is this real concern in the generative AI community and people like Michael who are training models that we are running out of good data. The big models that we've trained on have scraped a lot of data up to about 2022, but as of that point, making sure that you can know the quality of the data is human-generated, clean, useful material is becoming challenging. Maybe 1,000 years ago, that was also a feature of being a Christian, where you weren't quite sure whether that was exactly what the bishop had said or etc. But we have kind of solved that problem. We know that we go back to the Word of God. And so it's something that I guess we really need to hold on to, the more that the rest of the world and the written word becomes shaky.
Anything to add?
Yeah, I'll jump in. But I think it also goes to the, I guess, personal discipline around this, in terms of we have to keep reminding ourselves, whether it's the Word of God, whether it's reality, whether it's what we know, that I think always we should have that discipline to test for ourselves, think for ourselves, challenge for ourselves, not take anything that we're given for granted. Through to questions of faith and God, through to where we should buy the coffee or where we should buy the shirt. And I think AI and the internet and the social media has held out that promise that it can make all those things easy for you. And I think the cost of that ease is cost in terms of often our integrity as humans, our ability to recognise the truth, our ability to think for ourselves, our faith. And I think that challenge is only going to get worse and harder in the extent that, it's so easy to fake it. And are we willing to kind of put the hard work in terms of these things, or when it's just so much easier to rely on generative AI to write our essays at uni or school or something? So are we willing to put the hard work, personally, discipline in everything? And
I was just going to say, it's interesting you talk about data. So one of the largest generative AI models out there, heavily curated, still used 1% of the original data set. So 99% of that data was actually discarded. And I think that data set has proven to still have problems. So there's a real issue around that. I think, and so you're aware what we do is in the knowledge management space. So we're actually not generating data outside of the customer's repository of knowledge, right? So it's a little bit, we do something slightly different on that front. But delivering a large language model to do generative AI that has 100% verified data is extraordinarily difficult to achieve. And the level of time and dollars actually exceeds the investment, as far as I understand, and I could be wrong, but as far as I understand, of all the large language models that are out there. So they haven't actually been able to crack that. It's a very difficult thing because you need to build these models, you need to provide it with an enormous amount of data in order for it to do its job properly. But having done its job properly, the data was too big to be able to personally curate everything. So there is a real issue around data on this front, and that's not going to go away. And in fact, the next generation of generative AI is coming out already in the search engine space, which is allowing more currency into the search engines in the generative space. Sorry if that sounds a bit all over the place, but effectively what it means is that instead of it being data from 2022, it's data from 3 or 4 days ago. Now, there is no way that can be fully curated. It's just physically impossible to do that. So we're going to see some interesting things happen over the next 12, 24 months in this space, where these things may actually be propagating out particular political positions, particular religious positions, and there is a concern, certainly that we have and we focus a lot on, that the political views of the organisation are becoming the political views of the generative AI. And that's something that is a strange form of propaganda. It's not necessarily wrong, but it certainly isn't something that everyone should be agreeing to.
How would I find that? How would I know what their views are?
Well, this is part of the problem.
How do I find that out?
You won't. You just do a search on your phone and stuff. So it's very difficult. It's very opaque. It's very difficult to see that.
Yeah, and just to kind of reinforce this point, these are data sets that no human has looked at, even a small percentage of them. And the breakthrough that we had in machine learning in terms of neural nets in around 2011 was kind of best shown by this famous moment where there was the ImageNet. It was a big database of images from around the world, and there was a competition to do recognition. Like, is this a cat? Kind of was the test. So this database has been around, was assembled in the early 2000s, been around now for about 15 years. And it was only about a couple of years ago or 18 months ago that someone spent the time to actually sample the edges of that database to say, what is actually in here? And they found extremely, like from an ethical perspective, they found pornography in there. They found images of abuse and violence that had been automatically scraped from from across the web and were used to train the same tool that we use if you've got an Apple phone that recognises your kids' faces. It's exactly the same line of technology ethically that's been taken from this terrible material, and in the same way, I've got friends of mine who have written books, and the IP, their books have been used in the Books3 database to train all the major open source and proprietary large language models. They've been essentially, that stuff's been stolen. So I know many of us as Christians, have to make hard decisions about whether to drive the car or catch the train or the plane to Sydney or whatever it is, because we worry about the impact of our actions on the world and the externalities that creates. Some of this stuff in the AI space is so hidden, so upstream, and so far from us because it is $1 billion trillion-dollar companies sometimes, that it's very hard to feel that it's very hard to make those choices consciously, which brings us back to the point of standards. At some point you do want someone to say, that's the kind of slightly better company, and that's the kind of one that's not doing so well, so you can at least have that perspective.
And can I ask any of you to give us an example of where a data set, what that means, if it's skewed and wrong, what's it led to? What's a practical...
So there are some great examples where there's generative images that have come out. There's examples where you type in a request saying, draw me an image of the Pope, and the Pope comes out as a person from Africa, a female person from Africa. So you can see that that isn't based on the history of popes in the line of the Catholic Church. And there's been other examples similarly like that where they're trying to balance everything, and they're trying. But it's just the size of that task is too big. And I just want to put it out there because this is where we get to we all hate AI kind of thing. And it is incredibly useful in a lot of what we do as well every day. And I think we need to I think it's difficult because with anything good comes bad. And I think that's really, I think my message to you would be, just remember that you're a human, you get to choose. You get to choose to come to this church, you get to choose to go somewhere else, you get to choose to, do whatever you want. That's a choice you get to make. Some of those things have consequences. They all have consequences. Some are good, some are not. And we have that option. And so if there's one message it would be for me to you is that empower yourself. And if you're worried, don't trust, is what I would stick with. And think about these things a bit more than just take what you see. Especially around election time, you're going to see a massive amount come up in the current election. And already AI is all over those things and they drive me crazy, can I just say. So my view would be that we would legislate against the use of AI, would be my personal preference in that space. Because if we're voting for people, we should be hearing from people. And I just think that that puts a stake in the ground that says AI is really great, does a lot of really useful things, but if we're going to trust someone, can we have the person and not have something representing the person?
So I'm going to take your how you started the conversation as a segue into another question here, in terms of moving away from let's all hate AI and all the risks. Can you all give us an example or a few examples of what you see as the great potential, particularly in showing either mercy or justice or working against poverty, something that it would be close to God's heart? How would God like us to use this tool, this amazing tool we've got, for the environment? Or what's some examples that are already happening or being developed or have potential?
I can give one. So I lived for a number of years in Switzerland, and part of my time there I was working for the Global Alliance for Vaccination and Immunisation, an area of public health which became obviously incredibly contentious around about 2020, or became more contentious. But one of the projects we worked with was a company in Rwanda called Zipline. And Zipline is a drone company that delivers blood and then vaccines to remote regional communities outside of Rwanda, outside of Kigali in the mountains. It's a very mountainous country, lots of unpaved roads and some terrible weather in the afternoons. And so what happens is you can't get a four-wheel drive through. And the female mortality rate from childbirth was huge because anytime there'd be any kind of hemorrhaging or situation, you just couldn't get blood in, and they didn't have enough stable electricity to store blood for long periods of time. So really precarious maternal healthcare situation that was absolutely turned around by AI. And it was turned around because AI was able to fly these drones, keep them stable in weather. But more importantly, and this is one of the biggest advantages of this suite of techniques, is that the pattern recognition, the processing power of this could craft a path around the mountains in the prevailing weather conditions so that on the battery life of the drone, it could get to the village in time and, with the battery life to get it back to drop this package of blood mostly. And it's an incredible set of things that all have to come together that build on a lot of other technologies. But I might just kind of close that example by saying that human nature is so incredibly present in those moments, because when you drive out to a village and you explain to people, here's the app on the mobile phone. The next time, when Sophie goes into labour, if she's hemorrhaging and she needs blood, her patient records here, you push this button and 15 minutes later the blood will come from the sky. And it still makes me very emotional. But no one believes it. No one believes it. They go, look, you are crazy people. What are you talking about? You don't believe it.
Yeah.
And then about 2 weeks later, it happens, and poor old Sophie gets into a state, and the blood arrives, and her life is saved, and the child is safe, and everything, and the whole village is thanking God, and there is a massive celebration. And then 2 weeks later, it happens again, and there's bad weather, and the drone can't come up. And you get these calls into the call centre going, where's my blood? I expected blood. What's going on? The system isn't working. And in the course of a month, you go from humans being in absolute disbelief to praising and thanking God for something that is an absolute miracle, to then just incorporating it as the latest technique and set of expectations in a very short period of time. And being able to manage that set of that change and the way that these systems can help is both an incredibly hard technical problem that's made easier by AI, but the social system and the complexity around that and managing expectations is part of the humanness of that can create the problem and solve the problem too.
And there's a couple of things I think really cool in AI in this space. So one of the things is crop yields rates. A lot of that improvement over the last 10 years has been through AI, understanding the terrain and what's going on in the weather, and then optimising for that, optimising the seed stuff. And I'm not a farmer, so if anyone else is, feel free to correct me on my terminology, apologies. But that optimisation is really valuable. It's helping to feed the planet, which I think is really, obviously really valuable. And people have different views on how best to do that, of course, but that is a valuable use. And the other thing, which is, and we do this as well for our customers, but others as well, is this speech-to-speech of different languages. And when you come into a country, if you can't speak the language, it can be quite a barrier and very difficult, especially if you're like a refugee, you come to a new country to flee a situation. So the ability to get, to be able to speak your language and someone to be able to speak back to you, but you're all talking your own native language, I think that's going to be a real enabler. And just to clarify, because people go probably to the Tower of Babel as let's not do that. My view on this, and Guy and others here might have a different view, but my view on the Tower of Babel wasn't about them all speaking the same language. It was about that they thought themselves as equal to God. And I thought that was their failing. So the tech of helping people to speak to each other is good tech, I think, and it helps people in lower socioeconomic situations in different countries and stuff come and work with others who may have a language barrier.
And missionaries.
Yeah, missionaries, absolutely. Yeah, good call, Laura. Yeah, 100%.
I'm going to jump in with a more, I guess, general thing. So one of I think the really interesting findings around generative AI in terms of that kind of working with it, helping to use it, is that often it's much more an advantage for the people who don't have the skills, who are lower performers or kind of not up to scratch. So it's a really, I guess, powerful way for people to get up to scratch in coding, website design, system processes and things, who don't have the natural background, come from kind of different backgrounds that don't have all those advantages that a lot of, probably to be frank, people like us in this room generally will have. And so it's a way to get people up to speed on a lot of those things that are really important in our modern tech process-driven world. Coding, websites, systems, processes, in a way that I think can allow a lot of people to reach the potential. It can be used for a lot of harm as well. But I think it also reminds us that, kind of coming through this, being clear about what AI can do and what it can't. One thing that we're hearing a lot is pattern recognition. AI is really, really good at pattern recognition. Kind of automated, kind of routine processes and things that you have to do over and over again. AI is really, really good. Identifying what's true and not, AI is no good at that. Because AI in the end is relying on data which is curated. And to be frank, all the data it's relying isn't anything about the real world. It's all information about the real world. It's all a kind of second-hand, one step removed. And if you've only got information at that one step removed space and no access to actual reality, you've got no way of telling whether your information's right or wrong. And the importance of curating data sets is the AI can't tell whether its data's any good or not. It's only the curation around it that tells us whether it's good. And so we're relying on the curation to do that, and we can't do it. So keeping that in mind, I think, really helps as well.
Okay, so we're getting some really great questions coming in on the Slido, so I'll grab a few of those and keep putting them in. I'll try and group them a bit together if I can. I'll pick this one because I think it went in first. The ICRC objects to AI weapons on the grounds that using them involves ceding control to an AI. Is this an accurate description of what we do when we use AI? Are we ceding our autonomy, our control?
Yeah, I can take this. So,
great question.
Yeah,
by the way.
great question. So, it's a sticky problem in international humanitarian law at the moment, in IHL, and there's a big military commission going on at the moment that the Netherlands is running on that point in terms of ceding control. And the key question at the heart of it is accountability and responsibility, and the ability not just to prevent particularly large amounts of civilian deaths or undue kind of accidental situations, but how you actually then attribute the responsibility of that, and how you trace back when an act of war or a war crime is being committed, how you then kind of find out how that has worked. And so that's the thorniness around the issue. It's worth noting that Australia, the UK and the US have all collectively been on the other side of the argument in terms of they want to have the ability to use autonomous weapons in those spheres of conflict. They want to keep the degrees of freedom at the moment, so that's something to talk to colleagues and parliamentarians about. But in terms of us ceding control, I think it does come back to this question of accountability, and that's a judgment call on what you are willing to be accountable for. So I don't mind using an AI system to scan my emails for spam. I've got no problem with that because I'm happy to be outsource that accountability. It's a very low risk environment for me. I don't look at my emails anyway, right? I just do everything I can to ignore and wait for people to text me, which is terrible for life admin. But when it comes to making a hiring decision in a job context, or when it comes to interpreting, a piece of scripture or something where actually the accountability for that is deeply important to the value that's created, that's when you need that triage to say, actually, yes, that's where the ICRC needs to step in and on my behalf and say, don't do that, Nick. That's where you need to take responsibility and either add layers of checking on the AI, so still do it, but then take responsibility for the output and know how to do it if that's going to help you along the way, or just say, actually, this is one where I need to do the work.
You've got some other questions there, so I'll be really quick. But I think that you should never cede control to an AI on the things that matter to you. And I think that's the golden rule. So spam is very effective, and I am on top of my email, so I know never to send you one. That's good to know. But I love it going to spam, and then I check that once a week. But I've actually put in my own rules, so other things go to other folders, and I check them in certain periods of the week, so I can manage my workload, because it's crazy. And but what matters to me is that human connection. So when it comes to candidates for working in the company, we go through them not with the machine.
Manually.
Yeah. So because they're the things that matter to us.
Yeah.
So that's I'm not going to say I'll do that universally, but that's certainly the approach that I generally take.
I'll just jump in and say I think there is a tricky question at times when, so like the social media feed's a good example in that it's an algorithm determined, there's AI sitting behind that. To what extent do you not mean to, but inadvertently cede control of what information you get? So I think there's an interesting slippery slope question with some uses of AI that you can start just by using it. ChatGPT bounce ideas off you. Where does the line then get drawn between you being accountable for what you've thought, or your thinking's actually been shaped by an algorithm controlled by someone else and an AI for some reason without you realizing it? That it's not something there's a kind of clear, it's one of those kind of ethical blurring points. But I think just being aware of that as a principle is a good place to start, because it's easy, particularly in organisational contexts. Hiring is a good example. Efficiency, we'll get AI to run through and kind of assess all the immediate candidates. It's kind of like outsourcing it to someone else. You can easily kind of start and then end up ceding control without meaning to.
This one could have a long answer, I think, but maybe keep it short. Robo-debt was a computer system that created lots of terrible outcomes for individuals. Were the issues created by the system or by humans or both?
I got this one.
Yeah, we talked about this.
I got this one. The algorithm worked perfectly. It was a terribly chosen, poorly chosen algorithm, and yes, some of the data was wrong, but it was a very simple data matching and debt issuing automated system. Nothing wrong with the code, nothing wrong with the maths. The institution failed, the governance failed, the people failed around that. Not all the people, a lot of people were raising red flags, but it was cruel, it was unnecessary, it was incredibly harmful, and it cost all of us as taxpayers more than $500 million net, like worse off when they claimed all that other money. And that was all unnecessary because the maths worked. It was just terrible choice of income averaging, terrible ignoring of legal advice. So that's one big issue in here, is you have to know when to point the picture at the algorithm or the data online the algorithm, etc., and where it's just humans and terribly organised, biased systems of people chasing a promise.
Yeah, so it's interesting because the maths was right, but it seems to me from the outside there was no way of building in mercy.
Yeah.
Do you think you can build in mercy? Could the maths or the algorithms have built in, or do you still need a human to sort of check it at the end and check that human, the circumstances, or?
Potentially. I think it depends on if you can codify mercy in a set of rules. Yes, that's a whole another different question. So you can be more merciful.
Ryan's mercy bot coming soon.
But I think too you can at least have an algorithm that is more merciful. I think, and more checks. But too, I think part of the problem with it was that we were in awe of the algorithm. It was AI, it was new, it was sophisticated, and we as humans outsourced some of our control. We trusted that this algorithm would do something that we could never do, and so there was that aura around it, which I think is another kind of real issue with AI, that there's so many companies now these days that are AI companies just because AI has an aura, which means people are going to invest money and trust it more. And so I think being really clear about that is another part of the robo-debt and a lot of these other stories.
I do think, and I was around in part of that time frame, but not involved at all. We actually wouldn't consider that AI is so simple. There's a very straight line. But having said that, it is that situation where Australian government has incredible power, and it has the power to help and it has the power to take people's lives. And I think that was misused at that time, and that was the issue. I think we talk about putting mercy in algorithms, but that once again is ceding control to the algorithm about a person's life that got it wrong.
And the government is powerful enough to build that mercy in, whether it's at the end or the beginning, or they can do it. You can do that. There's no reason why you just had to.
And we're in Canberra, right? We're in Canberra. Everyone here will have a view on this. There's no doubt about that.
But many people here will have an ability to intervene in these situations too.
Yeah, when you press an automate button, if you don't understand the consequences of that, you shouldn't do it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
As much as possible, as much as we possibly can.
Okay, this is an interesting one. Where did it go? I've heard that philosophers and ethicists are now getting hired to teach AI to be ethical. Given how subjective ethics are, what kind of parameters are being set? Have you got any philosophers working for you? Ryan could come and work for you.
Well, I'm Christian, so I am applying ethics inherently into how we do what we do, which includes who we sell it to, what the use case is. In some cases, we get them to sign a document to make sure that's appropriate.
Yeah.
I think I'm okay with that idea. We don't have any specific ethicists in terms of the company on that side of it at the moment. I just worry about that a little bit myself, actually. I worry that is now a person or a team of people's viewpoint. And to be fair, the big US tech firms have these guys. They have big teams of these guys. So if we're concerned about some of the things coming out from those places, then I'm not sure that's going to be highly effective. I think it would actually narrow to a particular view. But I'm happy to be wrong. It's obviously a new area, so yeah.
I'm obliged to jump in on this point, aren't I? So I think considerations they're probably trying to bring in are things like treatment of different groups of people, some of the ethical issues around AI trained on sentencing data in the US was, recommending black people got longer sentences than white people, and they're probably trying to grapple with some of those things. One of that's a training data problem, I think, rather than the rules problem, and until you can construct a massive fake data set that we're convinced is ethical, when we're training on humans, and humans are generally borderline ethical in all sorts of things, it's a challenging problem there that I'm not sure can be solved. And the other aspect to it, and I know there's someone in the audience who can talk better than this, shout out to Dean at the back, military ethicist at ADFA has been teaching special ops ethics, so that might be an even harder challenge, is that there's different kind of ways of approaching ethics. And the one that we would like to think is solved is what we call deontological ethics, which is rule-based. If we can have a coherent set of rules that teach us all ethics, and we can code it in AI, the problem is it's limited in all sorts of cases. There's always exceptions to the rules. And we need to think about other aspects like kind of virtue, character, what that looks like, but also thinking through the consequences of these decisions. A lot of the ethics isn't just about what you do, but kind of weighing up the consequences. AI, I think Michael's weighing up the consequences of how the system will be used is a part of it, but you cannot build the AI system in a way that's going to kind of take into account consequences in a real world which the AI doesn't have access to and doesn't understand. So there's real limits to what can be achieved in my view.
There's a few questions around the younger generation and students and the impact of AI on them and their ease of access to tools and what's some of the other ways it's worded. Any thoughts on that? Students losing the ability to think for themselves, for example?
Thinking's hard. Thinking's painful. Most people, as someone who's spent a lot of time teaching, although, as I said, thankfully not at the moment, but as someone who's kind of been in pedagogy and thinking, like, you've got to calibrate to teach well and to learn well. You have to be right at the edge of your understanding, not so far that it's too hard and you just can't keep going, but not so easy that you get bored. And you've probably all experienced this either as students yourself or with kids that just, sometimes the kid's just not the right level in that grade. It's too easy or it's just too hard in a particular subject, and both are really bad. So the promise of AI is that actually great pattern recognising systems can recognise when you're at that point and help you get to that point of really kind of crunchy competence at the edge of what you're comfortable with, but not so much that you give up. So a really good challenge. And actually it can and has been proven at the top end of the market of what's the solutions that are out there and the experiments that are being run to be really good. However, of course, because thinking is hard and because people don't like writing essays or answering problem sets, if there's an easy way out and life is busy and the alternative is served by Netflix or an attractive friend of yours, you will always default to that as a student. And so that's the challenge that I see and we see at University of Technology Sydney. I know it's present at ANU and even in training, corporate training, is finding ways to introduce that friction and to incentivise that friction so people will actually choose the harder option. I will say that when ChatGPT was released, when 3 came out, and all my other lecturers and others were saying, oh, this is going to blow up assessments, I kind of said, well, but it's no different to what's already happening when students are teaching these days, cheating these days anyway, because the only thing that really shifted was that people had stopped using, particularly having taught in the US, people stopped using online outsourcing to Kenya or to another low-cost contract like SA company. A lot of international students in particular flying into the US will, because English is not their first language, they will look for that kind of support. And so they won't be doing the work themselves, but you can spot it a mile off if you're in there. And so the thing that I kept on coming back to university admin on this was we just have to have the class sizes no more than 30 students in the class. Because as soon as you've got 30 students in your course, you can actually max at 30. You can calibrate the work. You can understand when someone's struggling. You can help them through that, and you can see when they cheat. As soon as if you're teaching 200 students, forget about it. There's no way you can do that calibration yourself, nor can you pick up that variation that would indicate that someone's taking a ride, and therefore quality overall is going to go down.
I was just going to say in terms of kids, sorry Lara, in terms of kids, so I guess you might be wondering what I say to my kids, and I say skills for learning and tools are for working. So when you're doing a job, if there's something that helps you do your job better, use it, right? But school is not where you do that. School is where you learn. However, when I was a kid, it's a little while ago now, I had to go to the library. So most of the kids these days do Google searches, and the schools encourage that. So they're already allowing some of this stuff to creep in. So my preference, and this is going to sound really contrary to the business I run, but my preference is that the kids have very little access to AI while they're learning. And actually, I would like them to learn how to build AI, not just how to consume it. And that would be my preference in a school agenda. But yeah, I tell my kids schools for learning, not for...
I'll just throw one more thing in.
Last thing
quickly. So I think the thing also with generative AI is it's really good. It kind of lands at the middle of the bell curve in terms of what people think and what people. It's kind of lands at the middle of the. It's a statistical. So if you ask standard questions from teachers that hit the middle of the bell curve, generative AI is going to knock it out of the park. But standard questions in the middle of the bell curve don't get students to think anyway and don't challenge them. So I think there's an onus on the teachers and the onus on the educators to think, how can we ask the questions, hit where they're at, but engage them, challenge them, and you need to do that to challenge them and get them to think anyway. Whereas if you're asking default questions, expecting default answers, then they will use AI and AI will do a good job.
This is something we haven't touched on much yet. So there's someone here or online is leading the development of an industry code for autonomous farm equipment, which will more than halve employment, and it could increase social isolation. And the question here is, do we need a national conversation around this? But I think we haven't talked much about that social isolation side of things, and also the example of using AI as a friend, to combat social isolation, and both sides of that, whichever side of that you want to start with.
I think we should have a national conversation about it, 100%. I think Australia is, and I'm in IT, right? But Australia has this great reputation, and even in IT, of being hardworking, getting your hands dirty. It's okay to get into it, and I think too much removal from that, I don't think it's good for the soul. And I think that's definitely a conversation worth having. The issue with that is the economics, and I think that's part of the problem. There's other things going on. There's a much more complicated conversation, and I'm only an observer in this space, but other countries owning large portions of our farmland, that sort of thing, that is pushing agendas too. So I think, I don't know the answer, and I'm clearly not in it that much, but from my perspective, I think there is definitely a need to have that more fuller conversation.
The other aspect to that, though, too, that we need to think about in this case is we're entering a world globally where workers are hard to find. Birth rates are declining, population globally looks like potentially now or in the next couple of years the global birth rate will drop below replacement rates globally. So Australia's relied on immigration to drive our workforce. So I think part of this national conversation is automating farm equipment, and I grew up on a farm, by the way, so all sorts of risks there, and I think there's a real kind of stewardship, connection to land, connection to country issue there in terms of are farmers really looking after their land as the way most farmers do if they're outsourcing it to AI. The other side is they're struggling to get people to do the work
Huge
as well.
worker
So,
shortage.
and this is a really kind of
We're
interesting
throwing
potential.
so much food away, for example.
Yeah, exactly. So it's
Much
one of those
waste.
interesting, can AI help us kind of address a massive global democratic issue where we're not going to have the workers to do the work that we need?
Yeah, my father-in-law grew up in Tubble, which is a small, I want to say principality, but it's not the right word, little village, about 30 k's.
His own
Where did that come from?
principality.
Too long in Geneva. Just outside Young, about 30 k's, 35 k's outside Young. And when he was growing up, there were about 200 people in that area of Tubble. The average farm would have about 40 to 50 people on it. There's 8 now in that same area, and they're all over the age of 60. Automation has already reduced the average number of workers on a farm, size, down to kind of 1 to 2, with kind of casual work coming in at peak times and a lot of contractors. That point that you made about corporate ownership as well as foreign ownership has changed the dynamics and the incentives to intensify capital. And this is part of a bigger national conversation we do need to have about what we need to thrive and prosper in terms of the goods and services that we want, many of which are in short supply. But also this balance between what we think of as automation, which is replacing tasks and supposedly freeing us up to do other things, versus augmentation, where it actually deepens and intensifies and enriches our experience and makes us more productive and faster and better quality at those things in terms of being a true tool. And I guess I think that national conversation should be one that leans much more towards augmentation than automation. But there is the danger that, like you imply, Lara, that the easy fix is just to throw more technology at it. So if someone's lonely on a tractor for weeks at a time, or there's only one person supervising 5 automated tractors and they're feeling a bit socially isolated, they can talk to an AI and form a relationship with an AI. That sounds stupid, but it's already happening. People are already holding this out as a solution. And maybe in some cases it's not a terrible one. Some people are incredibly lonely and isolated and there aren't services around them. But I don't want to create the world justified because that's the opportunity that exists. And I worry that we are going in that direction.
Yeah, we did talk about the ability for, inside the company, for helping old age homes where people aren't getting much human contact. And we talked through the ethics of that. And we came to the conclusion that we didn't think it was right. But that doesn't change the fact that there are a lot of people there that are very lonely. And I think maybe that was a reminder to be more human in those moments, actually, and to try and find other solutions and take time out for people, because I think that is a problem. That is a problem that we can become lazy in that space.
Can I just add a policy point on this, which was we were just talking to nurses about their experience of automation and AI in the workplace, and one of the things that they recommended to us is it's okay to automate things, but can we have a constant commitment to nurse-to-patient ratios? Because if it's used to rip time away from us and we are socially isolated and more stressed on the wards, we're all leaving. Whereas if that actually frees our time up to form connections and support people and do the human touch that patients and people don't get, fine, that's great, that's all good. I want to get rid of menial tasks, but I don't want to be more stressed and responding to beeps instead, which is the current situation for most nurses.
And I think when we discussed this, we talked about that not abrogating our responsibility as Christians to seek out lonely people, to seek out opportunities to put our faith into action and to not outsource that. I mean, if I can outsource the washing and the vacuuming, then it will free up my time. So if I can use AI for all these things, then I can have time to visit people in person rather than outsourcing that responsibility, that I can solve the problem of my elderly parent or being far away by just giving them a robot, that actually I can use it for other things and free up my time.
I just was thinking that we're in the age of mega government, if you look at the size of government from previous generations to where we are now. And I think the first default is to look at the policy positions of the nurses' ratios, right? But if I've got people in old age homes, which I don't, but if I did, that is a responsibility that I should be taking as a person, not as we need to increase those nurse ratios as well. So I just think about that as Christians, coming back to it, we have yes, it's in there in the New Testament. We should look after people who are alone.
Yeah.
And I think that is it's not a responsibility that's changed in 2,000 years.
And I think one of the risks we've got there is we've commodified a lot of care in our, we pay people to care, and we've kind of abrogated our social responsibilities as a whole society in a lot of cases, that it's not up to the local community, it's not up to the family, we pay someone professionally. Then that's an easy step to then go, okay, we can't afford that, we'll bring in the technology solution. So is it, to what extent, again, it's not the technology itself being good or bad, but are we using it to abrogate our kind of human, Christian, social responsibilities? And also, and this goes back to the not neutral values built in, so much AI is driven from a culture of increased productivity. So we free up time to do more stuff, to spend more time that needs to free up to do more stuff. We get ourselves on a kind of cycle of speed, doing more stuff, answering more emails, more business contacts, more that. The question is, can we, and this is a human question rather than a technology question, can we use the technology to kind of stop and put our time into things that matter more? Or are we just going to force ourselves more and more into that treadmill that social acceleration, to use a term from the sociology literature?
So this question has a lot of likes. If biblical and theological data...
Just so you know, Lara, that comes up in the algorithm higher now.
Yeah, right.
I
know.
likes, yeah.
I was thinking, what made it have a lot of likes? If biblical and theological data over the years was used as a massive data set, would that lead to an AI system that's good?
Yes. Can we just leave it at that?
Yeah.
No, sorry, I was just going to say yes, but it will lead to, you could still ask it interesting questions and get questions from parts of the literature and the Bible that may lead people to think that Christians have a different view on certain things than we actually do. So it is an interesting situation, but I don't think it's bad to try things like this, but it is important to verify and validate them. Yeah.
And I'll jump in. I think the issue there is, one, it's a highly contradictory, contested kind of space of information. So there isn't a kind of clear set of trusted data that you can give kind of clear answers. Two, it's always one step removed. So possibly I find a useful analogy is, imagine someone grew up in the desert and they're reading a book and reading stuff about rainforests. They'll have all the data, they might read a heap about rainforests, they'll kind of have all the data, they could be an expert on the literature about rainforests, but they're not going to know what a rainforest is like in any meaningful sense, because they don't have the experience, they haven't seen it, they've got no way of verifying the truth of what sits behind the information. I think AI has exactly that same problem, has all the literature, but no access to what the truth is behind it. And then the other aspect to it, which I think is really interesting, some of the generative AI, is interrogating it, it trains you, or you train it to tell you the answers it thinks you want to hear. So it isn't necessarily helping you actually get good or truth. It's going to often end up reinforcing what you wanted to hear anyway because of the way you phrase it and the like. So again, I'm not sure a system like that we could ever say it's good or bad. It might be better or more accurate, but there will be risks, I think, in it.
I'll stick with my original answer of yes.
Yeah. And this might be the opposite. We've talked about the flaws in some data and the inherent sinfulness of humans. So could synthetic data be sinless?
Could it be seamless?
Sinless.
Oh, sinless.
Synthetic data. First of all, someone's going to have to define synthetic data for me.
I can do that. So we do this. We take 10 images of a particular object and we can create 50,000 images from it and use that to train a model non-biased, which means the existing things it can see, it can now see this as well. And you can deploy that across like CCTV or at an airport or whatever for whatever purpose. That's synthetic data. So you're taking something that was real and then you create a whole lot of stuff that's like it, but not it.
So I have a question to Guy in the audience. Can and this is just showing my lack of knowledge, but can we say that an inanimate object or a data set is sinful or sinless? Like, we don't attribute sin to objects, do we? Right? It's people, it's humans that we normally. So in a way, could it induce you to sin? Could it? Yes, absolutely. Could it try as hard as it could to keep you away? Maybe. I really worry about these systems where you can talk now online to historical personages. I don't know if anyone's had a look at this, but you can have a conversation with Aristotle. You can have a conversation with St. Francis of Assisi. They're not perfect. They've trained on the incomplete data about that personage, and it will talk to you and pretend to be that person, and it's still subject to all the hallucinations and other problems we have today. But as you read that question out, Lara, I thought to myself, goodness, I'm sure someone out there has got an artificial Jesus. And then I thought, that's blasphemous, right?
Yeah.
But then I thought to myself, well, hold on a second, no, because that it's blasphemy, but is it, so then anyway, and this is something I need to take offline.
Yeah.
Okay. It's really troubling now.
Come back next year. Okay, here's one. What are your views on the goal of superintelligence that chief scientists at Google, OpenAI, etc. have to create an intelligence that surpasses humans? I mean, my computer already
This is what you do,
surpasses
Michael,
mine.
every day, isn't it?
No.
Secretly.
Look, this is an interesting one. There's a lot in this space. I think they talk about general AI, which is fully generalised artificial intelligence in its truest sense. Now, when I think about intelligence, I think about as a Christian actually, I think about God knows everything, so I'm able to discover something that God already knew that I didn't. Right? That's how I think about intelligence. So these guys with their pursuit is the ability to create new knowledge that wasn't trained in the system, and is able to create that at an ever-increasing pace, because it can, well, not increasing, but just at a pace like a human brain can. I think we're a long way away from that. I think there'll be a lot of things around that we can do so many complex tasks. Like I can take a microphone and a camera, and from that I can make it seem like I'm understanding what's going on here, and I could be sitting here virtually and be talking as if it's me now. That doesn't make it general AI. I think there's firstly, I'd also think we shouldn't do it at that level. That level of where it can make discoveries. So people talk about the value of this. They talk about the value of being able to go so fast that you can travel to other planets quicker. You can discover new ways of putting chemicals together in order to get more efficient fuels or solve health issues. And these are all good things to do. That's part of the human pursuit, right? But I just think that there is some element of that just has this unaccountability to it. I'm not sure about it.
I'll jump in. So one, I think intelligence is not a single thing and hard to define. So already computers are more intelligent at us at playing chess and Go and a whole lot of constrained kind of artificial environments. But I think, and so I'm going to kind of stake a fairly strong view on this. So I actually think, I think the expert median consensus is in 2059 at the moment. They're expecting artificial general intelligence. I actually think it's impossible, at least on the way current systems work. So reason being, one is the thing I've been talking about before, that our human intelligence is something that we train particularly and we build up as little kids, interacting with an external world. It's embodied. We bang things, taste things, throw things, smell them, get dirty. And it's a way of building our intelligence almost in a conversation or against an external reality that is fixed and set and teaches us rules, laws, how that works and how that are dynamics. So that's a real interactive way of building intelligence. And I guess one of the key things is core to human intelligence is an ability to make sense of highly vague, wishy-washy, abstract, blurry, kind of fuzzy kind of concepts and situations. All of those things, at least current approaches to AI, don't have and can't have. So your example, you need to generate 50,000 images to train an AI. often the human only needs to see it, the same thing once or twice to be able to have the same. It's an entirely different type of intelligence and approach, that ours is kind of embodied living in a reality. Artificial intelligence is all massive energy consumption based on constrained sets of training data that never actually get us outside that. So I think there's a fundamental, almost philosophical structural barrier that all existing AI approaches face, which means I don't think they'll ever be able to achieve general intelligence of that
And I
sort.
guess the scary thing for me is you don't need to get to superintelligence to have all the bad stuff we worry about with superintelligence. So the key, I worry most about just recklessly semi-smart connected systems doing stupid things because they're not aligned with what we want. And it's the old, what's the Disney cartoon, the magician's...
Fantasia.
Yeah, Fantasia with the bucket and the washing up, and that kind of, the corollary, the metaphor in AI land is paperclips, replicating machine, Nick Bostrom's kind of thought experiment on that. But yeah, Brian Christensen wrote a great book called The Alignment Problem, which is on this topic, which is in that sphere of, it's really actually just about us wanting to control and needing to control, less this moment when computers become smarter than us, which may never happen.
Yeah, and I think the problem is, but when we believe that the computers are smarter than us, then we outsource decisions to the computers, and then we run into a whole of these sorts of issues.
There's so many questions. I think, and some of them, they're all really interesting questions, and some stray quite away from faith. Well, I was thinking there's a couple. There's one interesting one around AI and truth and what's fake and what that means for the court system and justice. 30 seconds on that, Nick.
Lawyers will and do find it very enticing to use these tools, and the Victorian Supreme Court recently issued a thing saying if you're not using AI tools for due diligence, you're cheating your clients because it's so much more efficient. So it's like the other examples. In some cases, really do it because it makes sense, it's low risk, it does things humans can't do in a good way. In other areas, like writing judgments, don't do it. It shouldn't be allowed, and luckily people are realising this now.
And what about trusting evidence?
So we have had, so at the moment the biggest issue in the court system with AI is the fact that it's very hard to get evidence about how an AI works. And then the other issue is, of course, people are getting prosecuted and put in jail on the basis of erroneous, in small, very limited case, on erroneous AI systems. But yeah, it is an issue. I think on balance, it's probably pattern recognition in those systems is going to be more beneficial than it'll be harmful. That doesn't mean that the courts won't be full of AI-generated court cases, like AI-generated claims, because that's going to become easier, going to overcome that aspect, which will raise court fees. And it also doesn't mean that we're going to have other problems in giving evidence. But yeah.
There is some tech going on now, research around being able to easily detect, but that's a long way off. And if you think about it, the tech to create fake things is well advanced, so it's way behind. So it's probably going to be that sort of catch-up issue.
I think I might kind of wrap it in. Maybe we'll get back to some of those, to the ministry questions. And this is a big question too, but what are some ways we could use AI beneficially in ministry? So maybe we tackle now the question of, is it okay to use some AI and ChatGPT in sermons and things like that, and other forms of ministry?
Well, I will point out that Guy did once use ChatGPT in a sermon. He said he consulted ChatGPT to write it, and he started reading out and said it was terrible, so he wrote his own one. So I think it partly comes back to that kind of ownership, decision and control. So I think outsourcing something important, personal, spiritually focused to a machine is probably not just wrong, but blasphemous almost, in the sense of you're outsourcing your personal responsibility, your relationship to God, to something else. You're kind of, in a sense, putting something else in charge rather than you. To the extent, though, that you're using it like another research tool, like using a Google search or something else, I think there's open questions there that that may be appropriate and speed up and free up time to do other things. I think more broadly in terms of ministry, a lot of it, a lot of those benefits are probably the benefits in all sorts of work. If you can free up the routine tasks, create nice graphics, organise some of the events for those kind of people-human interactions, speed up the organisational processes, real benefits so that you can free up the time to do the things that you're in ministry to do and caring for the people and prayer, relationship with God and all of that. But again, it's that control thing, and there is a slippery slope question there that in many cases it might be safer not to go there at all.
I also just love the fact that, and this just riffs on that, so it is kind of related to the ministry question, but when we were preparing, this question came up about, how to use this and, what are the trade-offs, etc. And I said, when I drive to Sydney, I often talk to ChatGPT about the things that I'm working on because it records it all in notes. So it's like an interactive note-taking tool. So I'm not using it to give me advice. I'm just kind of almost structuring thoughts, and then I can cut and paste that into documents later. And the reaction from the other three were, well, you should have been praying. When you're driving to Sydney, the whole time should just be prayer. Really, really thoughtful, intense prayer. And I thought, thank you. I had not brought that up. So that's my confession.
Yeah. Any thoughts on
No.
ministry?
I think those guys have covered it. Yeah, I agree with them.
We didn't do any audience questions. I don't know if anyone's brave enough to ask one or has.
We've got 8 minutes.
We've got 8
Anyone
minutes.
wants to put their hand up?
Real live question. Oh. Hang on, for the people
live stream.
online.
Like and subscribe.
I would never expected a question from you, James.
Yeah, I'm a bit predictable. My question is around, so a lot of what you've said is predicated on, I guess, Western country conceptions of AI and, there are universities, government commissions on inserting ethics into the models, trying to regulate the companies, the LLMs. But there are a lot of countries in the world where those ethical standards may not be as important and might be cut out entirely. How do we grapple with kind of two speeds of artificial intelligence? One governed by ethics, one potentially governed by more utilitarian principles, or by maybe in the worst case, actually harmful kind of principles?
I mean, my solution is I don't like ethics. I don't think we should be relying on ethics. I think we should be relying on law. I think we should, as far as possible, go back to that principle of international law, of international norms, of international standards. When you look at how this plays out in countries around the world, it's not ethics, it's power. It's all about power. It's what you can get away with. It's what benefits you, your people, your community, your political position. That's the reality, and it's terrible, and it's part of the world. And so at some point, you do have to say, at a very deep level, values are incredibly shared across the world. Human dignity, kind of sustainability for next generations, and the common good are 3 principles that are shared in every culture, every common culture that we have, and there's studies to prove this. The challenge is that societies and their representatives don't act that way when resources are constrained and contested, and in that case, yeah, absolutely, it's a really challenging issue, and I don't think we can rely on tech companies doing the right thing. I don't think we can rely on governments, even our own, doing the right thing. I think we need to hold each other to account, and that also speaks about how we act as a community here with our use of these technologies.
I think that's a really good question, and I think the answer is culture. So we talk about our culture here and now, in this time and this place. If you go to country New South Wales, you go to other parts of Australia, these answers might be different, actually. And if you go to Southeast Asia or other countries, the answers will be different again. And I think a mistake would be to think that we have a monopoly on the truth. I think we have, as Christians, we know God, and we have an obligation and responsibility to spread that word to others. But they have a different culture to us in different countries. And And anyone who's done missionary work can talk at that much more than I can. But we see our AI in use in other countries in different contexts. And it's always used in a way that mirrors and reflects our own ethics here and our own culture here in Australia. It's always going to have people using it for different things. And that's the nature of having a tool. You can use it for good and you can use it for bad. And that's from our context. There is an obligation for us to try and change that where we can, but that's a very difficult thing to do.
Shall I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm not an avid user of AI yet, but I have colleagues that are. And we asked them to ask a question of a number of different LLMs, and they went to ChatGPT, and it was a medical question in the field of vaccines, and the answers that came back were extremely plausible, and I thought, this is probably spot on. So we asked them to ask what the source of this information was, to provide some citations as to where the information came from, and they provided lists of scientific papers. There were real people. There were sensible titles. There were real journals, but every single one of them was false, right? They were not real. Okay, they were completely made up. So it made me wonder, what is truth in this context? You get this information, and you actually take or have an opinion that actually what you've given is accurate and truthful. But actually it can regurgitate anything which may not be real. So I'm just wondering how you address this issue of what is truth, and in the context of the Christian context as well, understanding what is truth and the reliance on these AI to find truth and insight bothers me when it might not be real.
I'll go first. So I think first thing is AI is not good at revealing truth because it, as I've said, it kind of doesn't have the access. I think what it's good at in that context is effectively summarizing what the majority of the training data would say if it was talking as a person. So it's very much talking about what, based on its training data, someone who has access to the training data would say if they were making up an answer on the spot. It doesn't have any kind of direct access. It's not sourced in the way that internet source is work. It kind of synthesizes it all, and so it comes up with very plausible sounding things. I think key thing with AI is we should never rely on it for truth. It doesn't give it, it's not sourced, it's not grounded. It can be useful for insight potentially in terms of understanding based on what all the information is, this is a sort of something would say, and that may tell you something interesting or different, but you always need to take the next step and verify, check, go beyond that. I mean, I think there is a real risk in the way that all the search engines are trending towards being kind of AI answering engines rather than search engines. At least with a search, it gives you, here's a bunch of sources that you can go away and check for yourself. The AI is, here's a regurgitated, synthesized answer based on the sorts of things that the training data would say, which may or may not have anything to do with anything that's real or not. It's kind of the mean average of what the internet would say on this topic. For topics where the internet's all technical literature, that's probably okay. For topics where there's all sorts of stuff on the internet, basically, I mean, the way I see it is, do you trust the internet on this topic? If yes, then you can trust AI. If no, then it's an informational input that might help synthesize and arrange things. But I think relying on it for truth is really, really dangerous and misleading. It's not what it does.
So I was just going to say, a lot of our business is off trust. So we're trusted as a company with our AI. So our citations do link to actual documents, and we only generate knowledge from that. But ChatGPT and other things, they're based off a vastly different paradigm, as Brian talked about. So just think of AI as an imitator. And I think that's an important thing to understand. It imitates what we want it to imitate, whoever builds it. So just think about it in those terms. And I think when something sounds good, there's so many half-truths that sound right that have shaped this world in terrible ways sometimes, right? So I think that that's something really to know. If something can provide evidence, then it can be trusted. And if something provides evidence, but the evidence isn't real, it's not that you can't trust the content created, you just don't know you can. And I think that's an important difference.
Okay.
Are we out of time? I'm happy if you say...
one more.
4 years ago, I saw a demonstration of Robo-Priest. And I looked and I saw, this isn't going to happen. A few weeks ago, I was invited into a demo where a company had done just 10% development time for free just to show us what they could do. And it was like in a VR, virtual reality situation. And I'm beginning to think, these guys are already doing what we are teaching chaplains and other things to do. So is there a space where there are conversations going on in this realm where we are saying, actually, no, we don't really want you to go there because this is really of the spirit, of the soul, of the heart? Is there any conversation space around at the moment? I'm just wondering.
Oh, look, I was just going to quickly say, Guy could hold a sermon here with this congregation and 100 others, using AI as part of that. And that's not probably what we're talking about here. I think in terms of having a robo-priest, like a fully AI-enabled priest, it's just back to that previous point of imitation. And throughout the Bible, there are stories of imitation, and I won't go through those ones now, but it's clear that, well, God's the real deal, so God's messenger should be the real deal. That's my personal view.
And there are a couple of really interesting podcasts around about how different faiths are using this, and some are more accepting of robots as part of their theology. And so it might be something that becomes a distinguishing factor of Christianity, for what you were saying, that authenticity and whereas there's some of those, they're really complicated podcasts to listen to, but fascinating about how different cultures, back to the other question, and different religions are embracing different parts of this with less worry or less being anti it.
So I think in summary, I think we're all up here would be agreement is stay well away from that. But where there are conversations there will be people who do it and will be people who promote it as the future. But I think, lots of danger there.
I think we might have to finish up, but we...
I was just going to say the Catholic Church did do that recently. They had to laicise their Father Justin.
Right.
They had to demote him for people who didn't hear that.
I think this is going to be one of those embarrassing tech things. I think I've logged in as a user, so I can't see the outcome of the poll. How do I see the outcome of the poll? I need some techie, all I can see is that 22 people have voted. If you want to quickly vote in the poll while we sort out how we find out how I get the answer.
What was the question again?
I clicked all those buttons.
What was the question?
Can Guy use AI to write a sermon?
Okay, well,
You've got the answer?
Just before you do, I'll just say that I did ask this question of two of my 3 children earlier this evening, and Guy, unfortunately, they both came back with no. You can't.
The outcome is 59% say in certain circumstances. 24% yes, 17% no.
Okay.
So the slippery slope wins. Temptation. So tempting.
So let me try and close it off. What a really great night. So many interesting things, such a conversation. I mean, the stuff I've been reading, this is one of those paces of change that is going to be so fast. If you thought our adaptation of the internet was fast, this is going to, be much faster. And we really need to keep on top of this just as good users of society and good members and good neighbours and good visitors of our friends and neighbours and parents and teachers and lawyers, all the things we've talked about. So thank you for coming and engaging with this topic, and maybe we run a part 2 in a year or two's time and see where things have got to. There are so many resources out there too, and we did discover that a Canberran, someone working at Focus at the ANU, has just written a book. His name's Stephen Driscoll, Made in Our Image. I just have only read the first few chapters. I didn't have time, I only found out about it, and I hadn't had time to finish it, but that's good to be hearing from a local about Christian thoughts on AI. There's lots of podcasts. The Centre for Christian Living in Sydney has some good podcasts, and do a Google search and see what you get. You get some wacky stuff as well. It's really interesting. What else? Thank you to the guys who've come out and done the live streaming for us tonight. Next seminar, we haven't really landed it. We're really hoping that Dr. Jackie Service, who started last year, gave us a talk on the Trinity, and she needs to come back and do part 2. We got so involved we ran out of time to talk about how the Trinity, the implications are for aid and development work, and so we're hoping to get her back in the second half of the year for part 2 of that. But watch this space for dates, and hopefully we'll have another one in term 4 as well. And I think I'm good just to pray and wrap it up for us tonight. I thought I'd read Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern the will of God. And I think this is one of those areas where we need to pray so we can discern the will of God in the big things, and then in our daily things, what we type into the search engine, what we're looking for, how we're using it to improve our lives and to improve our relationship with God and improve our relationship with others. Is that our test of whether we're using it well? How does it having a positive impact on those relationships that are the most important to us? So let's pray, and I have also got a beautiful blessing from an Indigenous minister that Common Grace has released for Reconciliation Week, so I'll finish with that too. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the amazing gifts you've given to us, the creativity, the intelligence, the ability to problem solve, and the way that we are using this to improve so many aspects of our lives. Thank you too for those loved ones that you give us, the relationships, our friends, and the members of this church. We pray that you would help us to be supportive and loving and kind, and help us to discern your will and how to be wise as we embrace these new technologies and think about how we can have a positive impact and how we can use them to draw closer to you and draw our friends and family closer to you too. May the God of creation warm your heart like the campfires of old. Bring wisdom and peace as shown to the first peoples of this land. Shake off the dust from the desert plains by the refreshing rains, followed by the glow and the warmth of the sun. Let the light of God show us the right path and stand tall like the big river gums, drawing life from the ever-flowing waters. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you. I'm sure we can stick around, not all night, but stick around for a while and keep asking the questions. And I'm sorry if you asked a question and we didn't get to it. There were a lot there. Thanks very much.